Greetings, everyone. In this particular short module, what I want to do is more or less a preamble to some of the following modules that I'm going to have on low visibility approaches. But here's one thing that is important to understand in regard to a difference between as we start to discuss low visibility approaches and transitions from instrument to visual, one of the greatest devices that eliminates a lot of the techniques and some of the understanding that I'm going to explain in further lessons is if you have a HUD system in your position in the cockpit. In my opinion, it's one of the greatest devices for shooting any approach, let alone approaches in IMC or really difficult low visibility conditions such as Cat 2, Cat 3. But what is important in this transition, when you have a HUD display, you will always have the presentation. There's different modes that you can select, but what I want to point out is in this presentation right here, where you have the small bubble inside the bigger, sometimes referred to as straw within the straw, a lot of different terms for it. But if you fly that position on a properly set up HUD system display for approach to a particular runway, the transition that I'm going to talk about from going to instrument to visual conditions are all mitigated. Because although I couldn't find an image display here, when you get down 200 feet with the appropriate mode selected, like for instance IMC mode, you're going to see through the reduced visibility and through maybe just having approach lights, you're going to see an image of the runway that is part of the display. That comes into view at a lower radio altimeter altitude. So keep in mind you'll have that. Now, as long as you fly that straw within the straw, I'll use that term, you are going to not have any problems with a transition from instrument to visual. You just continue to fly the accuracy of the HUD displays, and that will bring you into the touchdown zone because you have an image of the runway on the display, even though you don't have an image of the runway visually at the initial point of picking up the approach lights. That is an extremely valuable tool. Now, here are some things that, depending on your airline, whether they have made the investment to put a HUD system into their fleet or into various portions of their fleet, that becomes a flight operations decision having to do with expenses, training, and history within the airline. But if you have a HUD display, that's an extremely fortunate situation that you'll have for flying any approach, but most importantly, instrument approaches. Now, the other thing, too, that I'd like to point out is that since airlines are going to vary with what is an option to have a HUD display, some of them may not have it at all. So what I'm going to cover in some of the following sessions is going to really be important. You may have cockpit setups where the captain has his display, but the first officer doesn't. So just keep in mind there's a lot of variances that may be out there in individual fleets, in individual airlines, and individual aircraft within an airline. So keep that in mind. The other thing that I would like to bring out is that an airline in all likelihood will have some training and some procedures associated with a HUD system. And it's important that you comply and use that information and the training to fly the HUD system. I've also seen within some airlines, they leave the option to use the HUD system to you unless it's required for, let's say, a Cat 3 landing, in which case, by procedure, by flight safety or flight operations policy, they would use the HUD system. But one of the things that may be the condition at your individual airline is that you're going to have the option whether to use this or not. Now, a lot of us are creatures of old habit, and this can be a confusing thing to use when you first are introduced to it. I would greatly encourage anybody that has the availability of a HUD system to use it and get used to flying with the HUD system. It's incredibly accurate. Use it at altitude. Use it during a complete flight. See how it operates. But for approaches and landings, use it when the other pilot is flying, and you have a total concentration to see how this system operates. But gang, it is important to learn to use this system, even if it's an option. Because what I've seen happen is when a pilot has to use this system and they don't use it and they're not familiar with it, it can get pretty confusing and messy for the individual and for the approach and landing. So I just want to encourage you, if you have a HUD system, use it, practice, be familiar with the different modes, use it in training, practice with it in addition to normal flying of instrument approaches. But I couldn't encourage you enough to get used to using this HUD system. So anyway, that is something I want to cover as a preamble to some of the lessons that are going to come to follow this, where you won't have a HUD system and where you're going to have to make this transition, and it's going to be a lot more challenging where you don't have a HUD system that gives you continuous guidance to the touchdown zone of an aircraft. So we'll go on with some of the other information that we'll have in following lessons. Meanwhile, this is going to be a great area to discuss and to learn, because situational awareness is never more required than making instrument approaches in low visibility. Situational awareness, as I'll bring up in the future with these lessons, it really starts once you know that you're going to have to be making a low visibility approach, and that means prior to making an arrival. So gang, keep up with this area. It's going to be very important in your training because you're going to do a lot of this, and the quality of what you get out of learning these intricacies with low visibility approaches is going to pay big dividends when you're out there in the real world. Okay, everyone, I look forward to some of the other lessons that come along.